Hey everyone, today on the podcast I have my good buddy Andrew Hutchinson back on the show. Andrew's been with us this may be his third appearance on the show. Today Andrew and I are talking about footwear, shoes. Is zero drop the way to go, or is there something better? You be the judge of that. However, I do think you're going to love this conversation. Andrew has some pretty thought-provoking things to say. Now, before we get to the show, a word from our sponsor. So, as it turns out, I am the sponsor of this show. I have a training business called Original Strength, and I have a online training platform called Original Strength Institute Online. So it's osi-online.com. And if you go to osionline.com, you may just find what you're looking for. If you're looking to unlock your body or design your body or build your body, or if you're just looking for a daily 21s program to just make you feel amazing. I really think you're going to like these programs because I designed some of them, most of them. I did not design Unlock Your Body. My buddy Chris did that. And I did not design Build Your Body. My buddy Mark did that. But I did design Your Body because I designed Design Your Body. Anyway, and the Daily 21s program. But guys, these programs they're really just to help you feel amazing in your own body. And they can do it if you do what they tell you to do. Anyway, check out our programs to help you feel better and live your best life ever at osionline.com. And now, back to the show. Pull up a chair and buckle up. It's the Original Strength Podcast. All right, guys, get ready for a very abrupt start to a wonderful show.
Things like I mentioned to you, like the footwear and all these things that I thought I knew X, Y, Z about, and still realize I've got a decent grasp on, but now feel a lot wiser because I understand a lot more and have taken on board a lot more perspectives from a lot of people that I would have possibly not poo-pooed, but wouldn't have allowed that into my world.
So what is it about footwear? Like, what have you discovered?
Well, obviously the whole idea of something being what we have come to know as zero drop makes sense on most levels, and I think most people at a glance, or even people that don't necessarily do that, would say, yeah, of course, it makes sense. The foot sits normally when it's barefoot on a flat surface, so we should ideally have it on a flat surface if it's in a shoe. However, the moment that you introduce even the slightest bit of toe spring, and you show me a shoe that doesn't have toe spring other than something like Softstar, it doesn't exist. Even zero shoes and Lems and Vivo Barefoot, there's all enough toe spring to lift your toes probably 4, 5, 6 mil off the floor, maybe a bit more. And the moment that you elevate the toes even slightly, that changes things in a massive way with regards to how the foot is sitting and how it's feeling on the floor. So almost to counteract that, I can see why, for example, companies like Topo, who I wouldn't necessarily wear their shoes because I find them a bit too thick, why they put 3 mil drop in, why they put 4 mil drop in, why some people go for 6 mil drop, 7 mil drop, 8 mil drop, why when I've tried shoes on with 3 and 4 mil drop in recent times, they feel flat. They don't feel. And why when I put on, say, a pair of Ultra Superior with all the love in the world, they feel like they've got a negative heel, and that doesn't feel great. It doesn't make it bad. It's make it, it is what it is. But yeah, it's been interesting realizing that, and therefore why certain things. Well, we could go really deep with this in terms of how the body moves. Things that we do with regards to movement are quite literal. So in terms of, I'm sure we've discussed this before, the idea of when people say things are looking up. If you look up, ideally with your mouth closed for about 20 or 30 seconds, just looking up at the sky or looking back as far as you can, like a head nod almost, but hold it there, you'll find almost anyone that does that starts to feel like they want to smile. Now, exactly what changes are going on in the body as you open this up, as you open the heart up to an extent and you open the thyroid area up, I couldn't tell you exactly what chemistry is released, but I do know how it makes you feel. So, when things are looking up, things feel better. When you look down, and we know when people spend a lot of time on their phones and looking down and all hunched up, they don't feel so good. They lead to depression and symptoms of Parkinson's and so on and so forth. It's like stability, stability of mind is created by stability of body. Because when you do exercises that encourage stability of body, obviously it works a lot of different parts of the body, but in particular, if you balance on one leg, for example, you'll find there's a lot going on at the top of the thigh and in the pelvic region and so on and so forth. It creates a certain chemistry, and that chemistry makes you feel more stable. Exactly what those chemicals are and why that is, I'm not diving really down that rabbit hole. I don't need to have experienced it. And I think that when it comes to footwear, there's also an impact there. As crazy as it might sound, if you lean back a little bit too far, you can almost go backwards. And if you lean forward too far, you can almost start going too far forward. You can be looking too far in the distance. So you could almost start to call that anxiety versus depression almost. And somewhere in there's a balance, as everything. Can't prove any of that, but my hunch is that you could possibly extrapolate it that far. But keeping it at a really basic level is that if you clearly, as we know, posture is reflexive. So yeah, it's a dynamic thing. But if you want to start from an ideal point, then I think being open to the idea that zero drop is not always ideal, because that toe spring is really, really important. And it doesn't matter how flexible the shoe is. The fact of the matter is, if I put on my Zero HFS, they're a lovely shoe, but my toes are elevated. They're not the same as if they were barefoot, and I've yet to find a shoe apart from soft stars, which again doesn't make them ideal either. I know, obviously, we know why toe spring exists and blah 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 blah. But yeah, even that tiny bit really does change things. So I think it would be really nice to see that discussion in footwear from a non-dogmatic viewpoint. Yeah, and seeing footwear. Yeah, see more people, I guess. Not that it's for me to try and change that, but for that at least to be opened up, so that we actually do have truly optimal footwear. If we're going to wear footwear, let's really make it optimal, or at least head towards that. And I guess there are companies that are doing that to an extent, but they get poo-pooed for providing that choice. Like a company like Innovate, for example, they provide different width fittings. Seems like an obvious thing, but in the world of zero footwear, in the world of zero drop footwear, a lot of people are like, too narrow, too this, too much drop, 6 mil drop, too much. But yeah, a lot of people have tried a lot of different footwear. A lot of people I know, this is what I've been exposed to as well. A lot of people that I know have tried all these different things, and they've come to settle on something other than zero drop, and they were open to it. And they found these things work for them. And being a lot more open as I am these last couple of years, you start to look at that and go, well, okay, I'm not going to be dogmatic and go, oh, well, they're doing that. However, that's still wrong. They've come to that decision for a good reason. They've tried a lot of different things. So, do you know what? Let's have a look at this. And having tried a couple of times, I can see where they're coming from. Even a narrower shoe for certain things, So yeah.
So I've got a friend who runs ultra marathons, and she's all about foot health and knows all about foot health, but chooses to run in a 5 millimeter drop, because that is where she seems to thrive and where her body does the best when she's running.
And I would wager, obviously she has a lot of experience. I would wager
a lot of experience.
I would wager the reason why she settled there, and again, I'm potentially projecting, whatever you want to call it, is that the reason that feels good is because it feels flat. Because for it to feel flat, I would say that's where the body goes, yes, yeah. Your body sings, your feet sing, your ankles sing, your posture sings when it's placed on what it perceives to be flat. And if it's got its toes elevated by about 5 or 6 mil and its heel elevated, it's in this almost like a very, very tiny elevated hammock. So it doesn't really feel like a hammock, but it just creates enough. So you raise the heel up that bit, and it just takes that little bit of pressure to the toes to counter that elevation again. So it just brings back into balance. It's balance again, isn't it? If we elevate either end, there has to be balance at the other end. And I think that's why you see so many, and I'm aware, like you, I don't have many close friends that do super endurance stuff, but I know a few people, and so many of them either fall into the kind of 6 mil, around about 6 mil drop, or they'll go for a shoe, say like the Innovate 270, which is technically zero drop, but if you put it on, whatever it is about it, however they've designed it, it actually feels flat. It doesn't feel like so. Take the Superior, and I'm not knocking Ultra here. Ultra make fantastic shoes. But if you took a Superior and then one of those next to it, or a Lone Peak, they're both zero drop, but one feels like it's negative heel, one feels like it's flat. You don't feel like you're kind of sitting back in your heels. And I guess that's why I've spoken to a lot of people who will go, yeah, I've tried both of those or all of these, and that just sits right with me.
And it does seem insignificant that the heel being, the toes being raised just a little bit would make a difference, but the brain knows.
Oh,
and you've got all these mechanoreceptors everywhere, and they're always giving information to the brain, and it knows when something's not the way it's supposed to be, or if something's different.
exactly. I don't know, it's something like 200,000 mechanoreceptors on the sole of each foot, isn't it? Something crazy like that. So, yeah, they know. And obviously, the tendons on the top of the foot, the moment that you elevate the toe slightly, you pull them back slightly, but without you putting the effort in, it's they've gone into a position where they can't be as effective. Well, not necessarily can't be as effective, but they know, it knows. It's as simple as that. Like you say, it knows.
And I'm highly aware. I wear minimalist shoes all the time, but I'm well aware that when I'm barefoot, it is totally different than when I'm wearing shoes. Everything's different. Everything feels different.
So, like you know, I mean, I wear minimalist, and I do have zeros, and if I just because I don't necessarily wear those much anymore, it's not because I think any one brand is better, across the board. For me, I found that Lems work very well for me because they have that injection blend with the sole and blah blah blah. They don't feel like you sat back on your heel again, and they do actually have a couple of models that have got a little bit of drop, but there's also that little bit of extra protection, which is an interesting one. And I can now also see why people, particularly endurance athletes, but even people for everyday wear now, are looking for something with 13, 14, 15 mil of cushioning, because there's also that factor that the moment, like you say, there's such a huge difference that once you take away that true feedback, all those minute shearing forces and everything from a truly bare foot, if you just place 2 or 3 mil of plastic in between you, then you deaden those, but you provide no protection to counteract that. So it's interesting. Certainly my own experience has been that actually a little bit of protection now, and I've done the really, really thin, coming to something with a little bit of protection has actually worked really, really well. I still get good ground feel, but if I'm going to wear a shoe, then I'm cutting off enough of that feedback that having something to call it protect, call it cushion, for whatever, there's multiple reasons why, we could get into concrete, and the fact, concrete's a very, very hard surface, and all these kind of things. Having that bit of protection seems to make sense. Again, each to their own. But
I was going to ask you about that, because you mentioned Topos and Ultras, and well, they've got quite a bit more protection or cushion than most minimalist shoes. And does that matter? Does it take away from the body? Does it add to the body? Is it a detriment to the joints, or is it a plus to the joints? What do you think?
It's an interesting one, because my limited feedback of my own would say yes, it does. Once you get past, and again, before I go any further, obviously the amount of stack height is also relative to the length of the shoe, I believe. And obviously the weight of the runner. But as a general rule, if you imagine you've got a shoe this long and it's got 15 mil of stack height, it's technically a lot more protection for a foot of that size than it is when you stretch it out over a longer foot. There's a difference in behavior there. But yeah, once you get above about 13 or 14 mil stack height, I am not a fan as yet. I've yet to find something that works for me. Maybe that's just because I've got used to having a decent amount of ground feel, but that flexibility, still with just enough to protect you, but still be able to feel stones underfoot without being hurt. And I think, again, I'm guessing it, but I think we'll probably see a swing back to this beautiful middle ground. The market it had that very big push into truly minimal, and then there's been the swing back to super maximalist shoes, and I believe that we probably will eventually over time see whether or not we'll see a reduction in the number of footwear out there, because obviously that's a whole other thing, isn't it? The fact that you've got this huge industry. So what do we do if all of a sudden a shoe company goes, well, you know what, we could produce 5 shoes that would be the perfect shoes instead of producing the 25 we do now? Well, then they have to let staff go and one thing and another and consider their profits. No, so that doesn't mean that their ethics are out or anything like that. It just means that a lot of these businesses have now got to a point where it's like, okay, well, even if they did have that realization that we could produce 2 trail shoes, one for dryish conditions and a bit of a mix, and one for really wet conditions and a bit of a mix, and they'd be the perfect shoe for pretty much everybody. And again, taking into account personal choice, but let's say if we had this ideal where everyone should be leaning towards, let's say, for example, it was a 16 mil heel, 13 mil front, or whatever, something like that. How many companies are likely to do that? I don't know.
I don't think any.
Well, yeah, exactly. So certainly in my experience, there is a magic spot for a shoe that you could wear to do anything in, including ultras, if you had good form. And that would be something around about the 12, 13, 14 mil stack height, possibly with 3, 4 mil drop. I think that, would probably be a magical spot. But with regards to, does more stack height necessarily affect the joints negatively? Clearly, it affects feedback from the ground. Clearly, there's more chance of you rolling your ankle on a big, high stack height. But, wow, do I think it has necessarily a negative impact on joints? My personal perception would be probably not hugely so. If the shoe gives you, it depends how often you wear it, what you wear it for. Most of the cushioning market seems to have gone relatively firmish. So it's an interesting one. I mean, I don't like it because to not feel anything underfoot is not for me. And to be that high up, I feel very, very unstable. I think to feel stable in something like that, I'd probably have to have an outsole that was about twice the width of the sole of my foot.
I was just curious because I have a friend who spent years in minimalist shoes, very, very flat, minimal cushion, hardly any cushion. So it was almost like walking around on concrete all the time. And she pretty much was, because where she lived, where she worked, like when she went on walks, it's always on the road on concrete, hard floors. But she had a foot issue that came up, and she was advised to go to a regular running tennis shoe to resolve the foot issue. But while she was on the foot issue, the first day on the foot issue, her calves and her ankles were extremely sore the next day. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's fascinating, because now her muscles are getting worked in a whole new way that she's not used to. And she was used to minimal footwear and using the intrinsic muscles of her foot and all these things, but she was exposed to a new surface. And then I started thinking, well, maybe variety is the way to go for life. Like, we're not made to walk on concrete, but we're made to walk on grass, on sand. And like, so if you're at the beach, the sand gives out from underneath you. So your body has to learn a whole new thing, but you get to feel it. It's rich. So then I thought, well, maybe her tennis shoes are acting like sand for her at the beach, and her foot's going through a whole different range of motion that it's not used to.
Quite possibly. It's fascinating you should say that, because I did struggle to answer you with that, with like giving a definitive answer, because like you say, I think the variety is, the toes do certain things when they have to cling on to cushioning, which was proposed as a negative by a lot of people that were, very, very strong advocates for minimal. And why is that wrong? If you're doing that all the time, possibly, and like you say, with joints, anything that affects the way that our muscles move clearly has effect on joints as well. Quite often, if you wear a very, very minimal shoe and you're walking on a hard surface, there is that protective element as well. The body feels how hard that is. So there's almost that clenching up, which I know well about from when I got really unwell myself. You clench the body in almost to protect it. So that potentially causes a lot more restrictions of movement within the body, whether it be the ankle or, the pelvic region, wherever. There are a whole myriad of things that could happen. Hence why the more that we can learn, as you say, variety, play with it until you find what works for you. And if that's a Hoka when you go on an endurance run and you want to spend the rest of your life barefoot, great. If it's a Hoka every single day and that works for you and you don't get any issues, great. If it's really minimal and it seems to work for you, great. But just being open to the idea that, you know what, that might not be perfect for
Yeah.
me or anything, simply
I,
because it sounds good.
I came to the belief myself that it's more about being able to let the toes spread and having relatively flat shoe, whether it was no cushion or cushion, because it's all about being natural, right? Well, it's just not natural to walk on hard surfaces all the time and
No.
never be exposed to softer surfaces like grass, dirt, sand, whatever. I mean, it's just not natural, right? So why wouldn't it make sense though to, all right, well, vary your shoe wear up then. If you're going to walk on hard surfaces all the time, maybe you do go for a little bit more cushion. And if you're going to walk on really soft surfaces all the time, maybe you do go for the very thin. But again, you're giving yourself variety to give your foot and your brain different novelties and stimuluses to adjust to things.
Yeah. And the more that we can treat it like, the more that we can be playful and less dogmatic about these things, like with everything, I mean, it's something I used to do a lot, and I kind of lost that playfulness in many ways with regards to a lot of things where, it's just lose the dogma and try.
I think that's the thing, right? So the dogma is basically the information that's thrown at you. And we're good at taking information and we're like, all right, well, that's what they said. Maybe that's what we should do, instead of investigating it and trying it out for yourself and see what you're talking about is, well, what does work for me?
Well, this is, I mean, that was my biggest learning throughout being unwell, and certainly increasingly so the last few years, is that whole idea that, not everyone, but most people are seeking for an external source to give them the answers. And by all means, there's a lot of wisdom out there in external sources. If people didn't find OS, then there's a lot of magic that they wouldn't have discovered. But I know, and many, many people are aware that the true magic in any of this is beyond the techniques. It's in the play. The techniques are these beautiful kind of handrails or whatever you want to give them, whatever name you want to give them, to take us to that place where we're not doing that. Like a kid, a kid doesn't need somebody to tell it how to breathe or how to do this, how to do that. It does it through exploration. It feels it. And when you feel it, you learn in a very specific way. You learn through experience. So it sticks. So yeah, it's, where's the true magic in any of the movements in OS? It's in that playful spot where you feel it. You feel it and you smile.
Yeah, that's it. And what I've learned, it's weird. So I've got more shoes than most men should have. But I also know that my foot and my body is the happiest when I am wearing, they're called here, I don't know what you have over where you're at, but here in the States, we have shoes called Sanooks.
I was about to say, you read my mind. I was about to ask you what your favorite shoe was. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so it's the Sanook, but it's for surfers. It's for like beach bums, and you totally look like a beach bum when you wear them. Like they're not pretty, they're not fashionable, but they feel amazing. There's no drop to them. I mean, there's zero drop, and there's just a little bit of cushion, but the cushion feels like heaven. And it allows you to feel everything though. Yeah. And while they're sandals, or like they're canvas sandals, like they cover your heel and everything, they cover your foot. They look like bedroom slippers. That's the best word for them. It looks like you just got out of bed and threw on your bedroom slippers. But I can hike in them. I can run sprints in them. I can do anything, and I can lift weights in whatever I want to do. I can do in those shoes. And my wife hates them because it looks like I'm just wearing my bedroom slippers. But I know my body loves those shoes.
I remember the first time I actually saw you wearing a pair in one of the videos. I was like, he's got a pair of Sanooks on. Yeah, and then you can't get them here, or as far as I'm aware, you can't get them here. There's a company that makes them similar for like a cheaper version. But yeah, and I think they actually do, technically, I think most Sanooks do have a little bit of drop. But again, you probably wouldn't notice it. It's so small. Who's going to notice 3 mil in the heel? And like you say, the cushion, I can imagine they do feel like magic. It's because there is a magical space. It's like, if we are designed, as much as you can say we're designed to walk on surfaces that typically have give, whether that be sand or grass, whatever, even rock hard, it's not rock hard, is it? Even really hard, dry earth, there's give. It's not the same as concrete. And when you go onto rocks, typically, if you're climbing on rocks, it's a very, very different form of movement altogether. You are on the ball of your foot, you're moving more slowly. It's a very, very different thing. So Yeah, if there is a golden spot, Sanooks would be pretty flipping close. That amount they've got, I think it's about 14 mil, something like that, 12, 14 mil. And it's, again, I don't want to be dogmatic about that because, again, it's for exploration and variety. But if I had to design what I thought was the perfect shoe, to do as many things as possible in one shoe, because I do love that, I have to admit. I used to be somebody that had a lot of shoes. Now I'd love to have 3 pairs of the same shoe in a different color just for doing everything in. And yeah, something in that kind of realm. Well, a pair of Sanooks for beach bumming, a pair of trail shoes with the same kind of amount of cushioning and just enough grip for dry and a bit of wet, and a pair for something else. So maybe it's time to start making shoes. Who knows?
No, I'm with you, man. No, this was neat. I love talking about footwear and stuff. Obviously, I have a footwear problem, but
That's not a problem. Just a
but it is neat because I have been wondering over the last several months about footwear. If we do have to wear shoes, what is the best shoe? So
yeah. This whole what are we truly designed to do? I'm sure I've talked to you about wave-like movement. It's like if you truly observe a squat, the squat is a wave. If you observe how we walk, it is a wave. It's a figure of 8. It's this wave-like movement. Hence why RMT feels so good. The rope work. So obviously do figure of 8. So all this kind of stuff feels so wonderful. And it's the same in. I don't want to go off too much on a tangent here, depending on how much time you've got. But when you look at things like bodywork, I've spoken to a number of people. Masseuses haven't experienced quite a lot in the world of massage this last year, and how we address the body. Not only how we talk to our own body, which I know you're a big advocate of that in a very, very positive way, but how we address it when we touch it. When you think of deep tissue massage, for example, a lot of the time it's like punching the door down and going, you will relax. And it might relax for a little while, but it's just going to come on back. Hence why, and I'm not knocking these modalities as such, but that's why people end up having to go back and back and back and back and back. And I spoke to a chiropractor again the other day about this. And yeah, so effectively we twist you very rapidly, very simplistic way of seeing it, into position. But then that trauma pattern, whatever name you want to give it, just pulls back if we don't do the integrative work. And also a big part of that for me is we're not asking the body. If you hold a body part, for example, if you hold somebody's ankle or their calf, you just give it a really, really gentle squeeze and even ask it, okay, can I come in? I'll tell you. I'll start talking to you. You'll feel it. If you do that, you allow it, there's no need to go whacking on in there with a big old thumb or an elbow or anything like that. You will find within a couple of minutes that has just turned to putty. And yeah, it might want a little bit more. But at that point, it's said, thank you. The same way that we like to be talked to, our bodies like to be talked to that way. So it's said, thank you very much. You're welcome in. I trust you now because you've asked me really, really nicely. What is it you think you can help me with?
sounds like a power versus force discussion.
Exactly, it is. It's power versus force, yeah. But it's there's this urge in me to want to share that because there's so many beautiful modalities out there. Every modality has its efficacy, has huge power if we understand what we're playing with. And that's the key. It's like, okay, how does this beautiful thing that we call the human body want to be spoken to? And then changes everything. It changes all these modalities.
So you just made Dracula make sense. So Dracula is the most feared villain or monster, but he never forces his way in to your home.
No,
he has to be invited. He asks you to invite him in.
Yeah, this is why this as much as it's possibly overused, if you can overuse a word, there's a lot of people as last year, as you've noticed, will say I would invite you to. You're one of the first people I was aware of that invited people to try things, rather than telling them to do it. And it makes a massive difference how we use the language, doesn't it? So
right on.
These things are huge. They're subtle. They're subtle differences, but they're absolutely massive. Power versus force. Yeah, you're well versed in that, aren't you?
A little bit. Read it like maybe 5 or 8 times, maybe 10. I'm not sure. Andrew, this has been a lot of fun.
Yep. Hey, buddy. Great to catch up.
It was great to catch up. Yes. And I will have to do it again.
Yeah, we will.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Now get outside and play.